All right, hey class, happy Wednesday. So today, like I said, what I want to do is I want to take a video, I want to dedicate a video to just walking through your lit review. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you through step by step, piece by piece of a sample essay. Now, this is from a previous iteration of English 3010, which means it will be missing some components that yours will have. However, you will get a sense of what a lit review does and how it's put together. So this is still good stuff to look at. Just keep in mind that this is not a comprehensive version because it won't have, for example, the proposal element at the end. But again, this is just to kind of get you the gist if you're confused about what you're supposed to be doing. Now, what you're going to see here as we go through this is a student who wrote an essay about the field of jazz music. They were a music major and they were interested in jazz in particular. And so what they've done is just like what you've done is you've identified a particular topic within the field that you want to join. In this case, this person has identified women in jazz and their impact. That's a topic that he or she really wanted to pursue. And what they've done is as they've come up with some research, they've gone through some of their sources and they've been working around with this basic research question, just like you created in Project 1, or maybe in Project 2, or even now you're coming up with some sort of question that you're curious about as you go through your sources, right? And so that's how these things happen. You could start with a question, right, that gets you curious, that gets you into the library to do some research, or as you're doing research, you might start asking questions as you learn more about the topic. So either way. So in this particular case, what we have here is a student who is interested in women in jazz. And so the question is, what are the view of female jazz musicians and the impact of this view? Now, a couple things that I would point out here off the bat is like, what do you mean by view, whose view, right, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially, we have a good working question. So I'm going to scroll through quickly, and then we'll go back one by one and tackle these things one by one. So what you'll see here is a lot of kind of extended paragraphs, but what I want you to pay attention to as we scroll through are these section headers. Now, this is where you will start to divide your research up. And so I'll be making comments on, I know I said I'd try to get them to you, but I'm almost done with your drafts. I got a little bogged down yesterday, but I will be making comments on your project too about like, hey, this would be a good, you've got a good organization or whatever, to help you try to see how you might organize these things. Anyway, what these headers are organizational tools. So what the author has done is they've grouped different resources together based on their similarity or based on their relationships and put each one in their own little section. So this one will be about jazz history. Scrolling down, this one will be about factors contributing to lack of female participation. Scrolling down, 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 down. And then kind of a continued one with a more specific angle on that topic. And then we have our conclusion, okay? And so that's how I want you to start to think about your research is not only how are all of these sources talking to each other, but how might you group them together to help your reader understand the conversation as a whole. And so what I mean by that is you're going to start to see how some of your sources in particular might be more closely related or more directly in conflict, and you might group those together to help your reader see exactly what's going on here. Okay, so let's take a look at this kind of from the get-go, and we will talk about it as we go. So we've got our nice cover page here with our research question. Then coming down here, we've got a nice introduction of the topic. So jazz is a musical genre. And then immediately we start to get into the subtopic. So although women are present, the proportion of that to that of men is highly unequal. And so what we've done here in this first paragraph, is to work from a basic introduction of the topic down to a particular what's called a problem statement. Okay, so what I mean by that is there is some sort of impetus for these authors to write their articles. And so what is that? What is the issue they're working toward? What is the particular problem they're trying to solve? Or if it's not a problem, what is the particular, the particular thing they're responding to? And so, for example, to go back to the healthcare one, you might have nursing is a field that's continuing to grow. More and more people are getting into it. However, The strain on nurses physically is affecting their performance and blah, blah, blah. Like if you're investigating, health and safety within the field of nursing, for example. Someone wrote a really good paper on that last year. That's why it's on top of my mind. And so, again, moving from the broad field into the particular topic or problem that your authors are dealing with. Now, one thing that I want to reinforce here, throughout the lit review, you are not interjecting your own arguments or opinions. You're not evaluating how well these authors have presented their ideas. What you are doing is you are just trying to be objective. You are trying to give your reader a sense of what these people are saying. So as you come to your first article, for example, you're not going to say like, I really liked this, or, he or she did a really good job, or it's really effective. Instead, you're just going to give me the information basically that you've contained in your Cornell notes. We want just the facts here, okay? All right, so here we go. Introduction. We have a brief statement of this person's interest in the topic. And then we're coming down here in order to talk about basically why this is an important topic. Okay, so we've got introduction, problem statement, personal relation, and then why this is an important topic. In particular, this author has noticed that there is a gap in the scholarship, and this is something that if you can locate it is really interesting. So what that means is you've listened into a conversation of about 8 people, and if you can identify something that they're not saying or something that they've missed or a point that needs to be made more clearly, that's a place that you can come in and interject your proposal, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay. All right, so moving down, we have our first, real quick, what I want you to note too is throughout this introduction, we have lots of research going on, right? So we're citing sources as early as the first sentence. I mean, obviously you don't have to cite it in your first sentence, but the idea is that, unlike maybe a more traditional essay that you've written, kind of especially those 5-paragraph essays that we're going to try to move away from, we want to see research throughout the lit review, okay? Because that's the point. It is a review of the literature. All right, so we get down to our first section. So you'll notice that instead of talking generally, we're talking about a specific subtopic. So we're talking about history here. And so the author is going to introduce the subtopic, and then immediately we're going to start to introduce the first author that we're going to be discussing. So in researching jazz history and its traditions, the beginning of female discrimination within the genre of music begins in the early developmental stages of jazz as it was rooted in the ideas of masculinity. While defining factors that inhibited women from playing jazz, Linda Dahl states, so immediately you're telling me exactly what your author is saying, okay? This is a really good introduction because this one little half a sentence gives me an overall understanding of what this one author is saying. So we know that from the get-go, this one author in her article is defining factors that inhibited women, okay? So that's a really good quick summary sentence that introduces the author and sets up a quote down here. And so I want you to try to think about that when you're embedding these quotes into the lit review, which you are going to be doing a lot of here. Make sure that you're not just dropping names in the middle of your paragraph or dropping quotes in the middle of your paragraph. Set them up. Let me know who is speaking. Let me know, give me a good sense of what they're saying. And so that way, when I get to a quote, I have some context. I'm not just sitting here like, well, what is this person even trying to say in their article? Okay. So with our first section, we have our first introduction of our first author with a nice quote that backs up with the kind of summary content that you've included up here. And then we're continuing with some more of their main points. And once you have that first quote or even second quote, it's okay to do a little bit more paraphrase. So for example, Dahl supports this idea by also realizing, so here this person is continuing to explain Linda Dahl's argument, okay? And so that is how we are going to handle our first source, okay? So this is a good example of how you would transform a Cornell note into a kind of paragraph in your lit review, because all of this might have been in this person's Cornell note. So we've got summary information, we've got a good quote, And then we've got main points, main points, main points, main points. And so throughout this section, this author has stayed so focused on this one particular author as to give us a good understanding of what they're saying. Okay. All right, so let's move on. So despite an overall male dominance, and so we're still kind of working in this subtopic, obviously. And you'll see here, though, if we come down here, this number 8, that we've started to transition into a new source. Okay. And so this is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of showing relationships. So we have this nice transition right here, despite an overall male dominance, right? We're starting to set up some tension maybe between these two sources. And then all we're doing is we're launching right back into it. We've got more quotes, we've got more sources, and immediately after that, we've got another introduction of a source down here, this number 9. Okay, and we're just working through, we're working through the sources. So in this case, the author chose to handle 2 sources in one paragraph. That's great. That's totally fine, because that'll help you kind of bounce back and forth to show the relationship, like, author A, author B, author A, author B, whatever it is. And so they just continue to do that throughout this section until we get down to the end. Okay, so this is a really perfect example of how to successfully execute a lit review. Introduction of the subtopic, really detailed stuff about one of the authors, setting up some tension between the authors, whether they agree or disagree, introducing your subsequent authors, right, and so that we have a good sense of the conversation going on around it. And then kind of a summary here. And so you can see we've returned to Linda Dahl, and then these other authors. And we're just giving the reader another overview of how these 3 or 4 authors are all having a conversation about history. Okay, so that's perfect. And then as we scroll through this, we'll see the same thing over and over again. Okay, the factors contributing to lack of female participation. So we have a nice little setup here. And immediately, again, we're launching into some research. We've got this, another source down here, even another one down here, okay? And so you won't always introduce the author's name in the sentence like they did for the Linda Dahl one. It's okay to have just kind of these embedded paraphrase, but I do want to see some quoting as well, not just paraphrase, because that'll help not only diversify your writing style throughout the lit review, it'll also help your author understand the more important points. Okay, so I just wanted to focus on that one section because then the rest of the lit review really does the same thing over and over and over again. And so it's a really good section to show you in order to try to parse out what the lit review should do. And so just to recap, for the very beginning of the essay, we have an introduction of the topic followed by what's called a problem statement. Okay, we have kind of a personal stake in the matter. So this is just your interest, why you're studying this topic. And then down here, we have kind of a discussion of why this is an important topic, and especially if you can locate a gap in the scholarship. So what aren't people in this conversation saying? So the idea is that once you've done this and once you've kind of followed the discussion that we've had here in this section for each of your sections, whether it's 2, whether it's 3, whether it's 4, once you get done, at the very end of your lit review, what you'll be able to say is, the current conversation about this topic, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. I've just explored the current state of this topic as it pertains to experts in my field, right? I just showed you how 8 experts are handling this topic. And this is where you would then follow that up with a proposal. Like this, where you'd say, what they're not saying is this, and so I think we should do X, Y, and Z. Or, author A had a really good idea, but we need to extend it in some way. Now, I will go into the proposal section in more detail on Monday's video. I did just want to kind of foreground it or foreshadow it here, because what I want you focusing on right now is your lit review portion, because that is the bulk of the assignment. So remember, all we're doing is we are trying to show how the articles or the authors, how your sources relate to each other, and we're trying to explain that relationship throughout the lit review. All right, so if you do have any questions, obviously please feel free to email me. I am happy to help however I can, and I will be in touch soon with updates in terms of Project 2 and all that stuff, so you should have it back as soon as I possibly can. Like I said, I got a little bogged down yesterday, but in the meantime, keep working, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.